Okay, I'm live currently to record and stream a little audition process for narrating audiobooks. So it's like an audition ride-along, if you will. So here we go. I'm configuring everything. Okay. So now let's see. I can't tell if anybody is on this live stream. This is my first time using Restream. Okay. So it won't show me who's on. So it won't show me who's on. All right. So, how do I find? All right, I'm trying to find myself on here so I can see what it looks like on the consumer end, and it no worky. All right. Anyway, that's not working, so we'll just move on. If anyone's watching, thank you. If you have any questions, comment them and I'll answer them on my break. The field wasn't in any danger of fully collapsing, as Callum was nowhere near strong enough to completely dissipate a field powered by a master level second soul. But he could make a hole. At least he hoped he could. He still didn't fully understand what he was doing. The field wasn't in any danger of fully collapsing, as Callum was nowhere near strong enough to completely dissipate a field powered by a master level second soul. But he could make a hole. At least he hoped he could. He still didn't fully understand what he was doing. A small tear began to appear, roughly even with Callum's eyes. With another deep breath, he sliced slowly down, lengthening the tear. The mental effort was extremely taxing, almost too much for him. It seemed to resist him, pushing back at his mind. Had he overestimated himself? Dampening fields were the second most utilized ability of a second soul, next to wards. Though they were Jeruscan in origin, all of Alvar was familiar with them and heavily depended on them to dampen emotions, hiding them from the Dreamans. What Callum was attempting to do, he was certain no one else had ever even thought to try. Why would they? Sabotaging one of their main defenses against Dreamans? Purposefully undermining a second soul? Running from those meant to protect you? It was unheard of. Joining the university, hoping to join their ranks, and that knowledge has served him well. I completely skipped a line. He had studied the bonding rituals needed to gain a second soul for the last year in anticipation of joining the university, hoping to join their ranks, and that knowledge has served him well with the wards his father set every night. For the last several months, he had begun to feel the power of that ward pushing against his skin. Callum hadn't been sure it was possible, but reverse engineering the lattice had worked to allow him to break the ward, so hopefully the same process would help with the dampening field. He had studied the bonding rituals needed to gain a second soul for the last year in anticipation of joining the university, hoping to join their ranks, and that knowledge has served him well with the ward his father said every night. For the last several months, he had begun to feel the power of that ward pushing against his skin. Callum hadn't been sure it was possible, but reverse engineering the lattice had worked to allow him to break the ward, so hopefully the same process would help him with the dampening field. His attention wavered for a moment, images of the stranger flashing through his mind. The tear had almost reached the ground, but halted a foot or two away as the memory flared up within him. Sweat gathered along his hairline, beading and cutting wet lines along his temples, over his clenched jaw, and dripping off to splatter against his cloak. Those whispers he had heard, the black fingers scratching at the wood, the silver knife offered and accepted, the red cloak wrapped around the stranger as he sat across the table from his parents. The red cloak wrapped around the stranger as he sat across the table from his parents. He remembered creeping closer to the hidden door, one he had never known was there. He had just wanted a book from the library, one that mentioned an awareness that sometimes manifested in the children of second souls. Callum's fingers had been on the very book when he'd heard it, the whisper. Your son, 16 years. We thought it failed. The stranger's voice had sounded like dry paper scratching against a rusty knife. The university? Our plans? Callum remembered gasping as he barely recognized his mother's voice. It sounded like her, almost. It was as if the entire season. An entire season. It was as if an entire season of winter had made her voice its home. No longer. He is. It will bring. Return. Callum had frozen near the dark doorway. It had been hidden behind the back bookshelf. one he'd walked by 1,000 times, 10,000 times. But curiosity spurred him, as it always had, and he inched closer, placing his heel firmly on the floor and stepping lightly as if he was hunting prey, just like his father had taught him. Agonizing over every inch, he managed to very slowly peek around the door. 3 wooden steps, covered in dust, led down into a small, dank room. A couple of feet from the bottom step stood a stranger to the left of a small desk covered in papers. He wore a deep red cloak with a large hood over his head. The angle made it impossible for Callum to see his face. His parents huddled together on the other side of the desk, heads bowed slightly, as if in reverence to the stranger. He had been focused so much on his silent creeping that he hadn't picked up on any more whispers until then. Then what? Rack? His father asked, voice cracking in a whisper. The stranger pulled his hand out from beneath his cloak, pale and stick thin, each finger gradually darkening as if charred in a fire. But it was what the hand held that had drawn Callum's full attention. A glistening silver knife. Callum was familiar with many different blades, swords and axes mostly, even machetes, and, of course, knives. His father had drilled in him endlessly. Callum was familiar with many different blades, swords and axes mostly, even machetes, and, of course, knives. His father had drilled him endlessly on the martial capabilities of each kind, as well as their more practical uses. This knife was unlike anything he had ever seen or read about. It seemed to be melting slowly, the metal flowing up and down, while a thin layer of ice appeared to encrust it. It was thin, double-edged, and without a crossguard. A small channel ran up the length of the blade, into the hilt, and up to a pommel that came to a point as well. It was unnatural and otherworldly, as if plucked from a nightmare made real. Sacrifice the boy, the stranger whispered, placing the knife delicately on the desk between him and his parents. Of course. His parents whispered back in unison, without even a breath of hesitation. Many slivers, he rasped. Made one. His parents intoned, voices blending together. Blood thrummed in Callum's ears, and his vision started to tunnel. Bile burned in his throat, and his head shook back and forth. The stranger knew his secret. Why else would he want him killed? Sacrificed? Callum had somehow managed to stay silent long enough to back out of the library. The moment he could, he turned around and ran out of the front door and just kept running. Was this a dream? A nightmare? Impossible. It had taken him hours to gather the shreds of his courage together to start making his way back to a house that no longer felt like a home. And as he did, he started to plot his escape. Callum snapped back into the moment and focused hard on the pressure blocking the tear from reaching the ground. With a final grunt, he managed to slice through it and finish it. Just enough room for him to slip through the field. Before he could change his mind, he pulled his cloak tight and stepped through. He didn't know if Lydia would be able to help. He didn't know where he would go if she couldn't. All his studying, all his research, his training, his whole damn life. None of it mattered in the slightest at this moment. He only knew two things right now. He wasn't able to dream, and his parents wanted to kill him. All right, we're running a sound analysis, scanning it, making sure it meets the requirements it needs to. We're going to save it. All right.